this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, along with our house DJ, Tolliver. And Tolliver, the middle of the country has a new claim to fame.
Does it have anything to do with corn?
No, it is the Pope is from Chicago. How about that?
Okay, that's where I'm from.
Yeah, well, I was, Instagram is having fun with this. I saw that now Michael Jordan is going to be named a saint, and Oprah will be the Queen of England as a result of this. So anyway, we are going to let other shows talk about that development and the ones that I just made up there. But we are going to focus this hour on the 70 million Americans who report having a disability. It has been 35 years since the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law by President George H.W. Bush. It was a landmark piece of legislation that banned discrimination against people with disabilities and mandated reasonable accommodations in public buildings and transportation. So 35 years later, what is still needed in society for people with disabilities? And are the victories from the ADA at risk? We're taking your calls in a moment at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. But first, last week on the show, we were talking about how government can work better with the co-author of the new book, Abundance. Here are some of the voicemails we got after the show.
Hi, my name is Eddie Navarrete, and I am calling from Los Angeles regarding red tape. Here in Los Angeles, we have a lot of rules and building and safety city planning departments that are really at the root of limitations for our community.
My name's Debbie. I'm from Manchester, Tennessee. I know it's a difficult job to do a government budget as large as America's, but I just think it would be better if we got back to instilling public service in people who run for office instead of all of the politics that we are just manipulated with.
Hi, my name is Jim Sharp from Brighton, Massachusetts. I have a very difficult time with the Trump, but honestly, he's really taken the helm and pushed things. I think that Democrats should put together a Project 2029 or 2027 list of stuff. More action, boldness.
Well, thanks to everyone who called in, and you can hear that entire episode on our podcast in partnership with iHeart Podcasts on the iHeart app or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, we've got our weekly extra One Thing Trump Did podcast on the Middle podcast feed. So now to our question this hour. 35 years after the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law, what improvements are still needed for people with disabilities? Tolliver, the phone number again, please.
You can call us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com. You can also comment on our live stream on YouTube.
Joining me this hour, Alycia Anderson, a disability and inclusion advocate and speaker. Alycia, welcome to The Middle.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
And Callum Borchers is also here, a columnist for the Wall Street Journal who has covered this issue extensively. Callum, great to have you as well.
So good to be with you, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
And before we get to the phones, Callum, what do we mean by disabled in 2025? It's a pretty broad definition.
Yeah, that's a harder question to answer than you might think. I think that when we think of the Americans with Disabilities Act, at least as maybe it was conceived in 1990, we think of maybe people who were blind, people who were deaf, people who use a wheelchair, some of those classic, easily recognizable disabilities. But the definition today is much broader than fact. In fact, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention uses one like this. It includes anybody who reports difficulty concentrating, making decisions, or venturing out alone because of a physical, mental, or emotional condition. So that is how you get some 70 million people, as you said, Jeremy, self-identifying as having a disability. It's 1 in 4 American adults. So It's a very large swath of the population.
And Alycia, you were born with something called sacral agenesis, which is an underdevelopment of the spinal cord. You use a wheelchair. What kind of a difference has the Americans with Disabilities Act made for you personally?
We've come a long way in the last 50 years or so of the disability rights movement, and when this legislation started to appear in our society, and it's the gateway to participating in life or not. It is absolutely imperative for people with any type of disability, whether it's a apparent physical disability like mine or the 85% of people that have non-apparent disabilities, to have the accommodations and the accessibility to access life and produce. And so it's the difference between freedom or exclusion, honestly. It's really, really important for this legislation is preserved and advanced. And it's been a massive piece of independence for me in my life.
Well, and when you think about all the places you go in your life, what percentage of the places would you say have the accessibility that you need right now?
We're pretty lucky in the United States that we have this type of legislation. Is it perfect? No. I just had somebody on my podcast. I've got a podcast called Pushing Forward with Alycia, and of the statistics of almost 1.85 billion people, worldwide having a disability, only about 16% have access, like physical accessibility to life, and a lot of that happens in the United States. So we have a lot of privilege here, but the Americans with Disabilities Act and other legislations are the entry point, not the end. Mm-hmm. And we're living in a modern day where we need to continue to advance these things as much as possible.
Callum, in addition to covering this issue, you also have cerebral palsy. What kind of a difference has the ADA made for you?
Yeah, look, 1990 was a big year for me, Jeremy. I mean, I was 3 years old. I was the year I had my first major leg surgery. Spent several months in like a full body cast. I picked purple, by the way, for my cast color. Go bold. If you're going to be fully covered
or for
in
Prince,
plaster,
I don't know at that.
Right? Yeah, you really
Prince,
go for it. And of course, 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, as you say. And so these were two really formative experiences for me as well. And as Alycia said, I think you really can't overstate the degree to which that has shaped access for people in our generation. And it's interesting to compare notes with folks, who did not live under the ADA earlier. I'm thinking, Jeremy, of a conversation I had with a Paralympian, who competed in the 2000 and 2004 Paralympics. So in his youth, well before the Americans with Disabilities Act, and even he was graduating from college, he told me, before the Americans with Disabilities Act, and he's legally blind, and he told me that one of his first job offers was rescinded once the employer found out that he was blind, and there was no legal protection against that sort of thing at the time.
So when you look at what's happening right now, and since Donald Trump has come back into office, They've gotten rid of the sign language interpreter at the White House. The web page on accessibility has disappeared. The administration has banned DEI initiatives, which certainly affect people with disabilities. Are the gains, Callum, of the ADA at risk?
Well, some of them could be, and I think especially for folks who have, as Alycia said, kind of those invisible disabilities, right? So one of the things that really piqued my interest in my recent reporting is the recent uptick in people in the workplace. My column is focused every week on the workplace. People in the workplace asking for accommodations. And this is partly, not exclusively, but partly a post-pandemic phenomenon, right? I mean, the ability to work from home was really a game changer for a lot of Americans with disabilities. And so when you look at the data from 2021 to 2024, how many Americans are asking for disability accommodations at work and making a complaint to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission if they actually don't get what they're asking for? You've seen a 51% spike in just 3 years from 2021 to 2024. And a lot of those come from folks who are seeking mental health accommodations. So again, these are not necessarily the folks who are using a wheelchair. It's not the folks who are visually impaired or deaf. These are folks saying, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have PTSD, I have some kind of mental or emotional health condition, and I would like a work from home accommodation to go with that. And I think that's the sort of thing, right? Because as you said, the Trump White House, in addition to scrutinizing DEI, is also banging the drum on get back to work, get back to the office. Yeah. Right. And so that's where these issues intersect.
Alycia, what do you think about that? Are the gains from the ADA at risk right now?
I mean, 100%. There's legislation going on and lawsuits in about 16 states to pull back some of the 504 Rehabilitation Act mandates. There's a lot of conversations going on right now, and there's a lot of fear factor around disability and inclusion that's false narratives that is leading us in a trajectory of absolutely having whiplash on this conversation. And I agree, since COVID and working from home and, inclusive work has been more attainable for people with disabilities, we've seen so many strides happen. And honestly, a lot of education, a lot of the work that I do is in DEI and going into companies and talking about the benefits of accessibility and the innovations and the return on investment on having a shift in lens of looking at disability as an opportunity in the workforce rather than this limiting thing that we have to fear and pull back as, a compliance heavy financial obligation when it actually really drives innovation and dollars in the door. So
well, and I'm glad you mentioned workforce, Alycia, because the numbers are pretty interesting that people with disabilities have like half the employment rate of people without disabilities in this country.
I think it's less than that even, but it's, the employment rate is low, but was kind of the trajectory was growing a little bit more. But we have a lot of work to do in the workplace specifically to get to a place where employees with disabilities feel safe to talk about their disability and what accommodations they need, and for employers to look at it as an opportunity to implement, a piece of accessibility technology that's going to allow their employees to be X amount more productive and profitable for them. So it's an absolute shift in the way that we look at disability for sure.
Yeah. We're going to get to some calls in a moment. And a reminder, you can reach us at 844-4MIDDLE. That is 844-464-3353. You can also reach out to us at listentothemiddle.com. Tolliver, as we said earlier, it has been 35 years since the ADA was signed into law.
Yeah, here's some sound from that moment. This is President George H.W. Bush in 1990.
And now I sign legislation which takes a sledgehammer to another wall, one which has, for too many generations, separated Americans with disabilities from the freedom they could glimpse but not grasp. And once again we rejoice as this barrier falls, proclaiming together, we will not accept, we will not excuse, we will not tolerate discrimination in America.
For the Gen Z listeners, George H.W. Bush was a Republican, just like Donald Trump is a Republican, although they do sound a little different, Tolliver, on some of these issues.
You know what? You're right. I mean, George kind of sounds like in the middle here now.
In the middle, right. Yeah, we'll be right back with more of what? The Middle.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Alycia Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
You see it instantly. It's Cold Water Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of bitch, come round here with my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, or philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking you what improvements are still needed in society for people with disabilities. Tolliver, can you give us the number again, please?
Yeah, it's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com. That's listentothemiddle.com. I'm monitoring those emails. You can also write to us on social media.
I'm joined by Alycia Anderson, a disability and inclusion advocate and speaker, and Wall Street Journal columnist Callum Borchers. And let's get to the phones. Jennifer is in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. Jennifer, I hope I said the name of your town right. What do you think could be done to make things better for people with disabilities?
You did great on the pronunciation. Thanks for having me on. I am a parent of a son, a 16-year-old son with a disability, and there are a couple of things that leap to mind. First of all, the funding of Medicaid is seriously at risk. There are a bunch of people in the disability community that get a lot of services through Medicaid, including, for my son especially, he gets secondary medical insurance through Medicaid. He gets respite care, access to camps, access to programs. He gets a job coach for his first job this summer. All of these things both help my family financially as well as allow us to kind of stay afloat in the world. The second thing from a disability perspective is, because we're in the thick of it, he's a sophomore in high school, my son is, And special education right now in Wisconsin specifically is funded at about a 30% level. We're advocating here in Wisconsin to get that funded at least a 60% level. So basically what that means is that our local school district has to come up with 70% of the funding for our special education programs. And some communities can't afford it, and other communities are really bootstrapping it to find even the funding to do the basics in this economy.
Yeah. Jennifer, thank you very much for that call. Alycia, let's talk about the Medicaid part of that. First of all, we think of Medicaid as the government health care for people who are poor in this country. But in fact, for people with disabilities, it can be crucial.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's around 17 million people that are older adults and people with disabilities rely on Medicaid for essential services that frankly, keep them alive, keep them going. And so cuts to that are significant in many different ways and threaten, access to really survival in life when it comes to, managing your disability or having the resources that you need. There's a disability tax. It's expensive to be disabled. It's expensive to have insurance and get through all of those challenges. And so this is a really, really important piece of advocacy that we all need to be loud about right now. So we're protecting it. It's very important.
And Callum, what about the special education piece? We know that, first of all, the Department of Education is being dismantled as we speak, and that's going to have a big impact on the amount of money that local school districts have for things like special education.
Yes, it will. And I think the piece that's interesting with this, too, I mean, we're talking about the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, but we're also 20 some odd years after No Child Left Behind. And where some of those things overlap is the push that many states have made, partly because of No Child Left Behind and some state level measures to assess and improve special education outcomes, is a bit of a backlash now. Like I'm calling you here from Massachusetts, for example, where we just in the fall repealed the state standardized testing as a graduation requirement. And there are mixed thoughts on what that means for students with disabilities. On the one hand, the argument is that we're taking away a barrier, right? Because the students who often could not pass that exam and were being denied their high school diplomas, they were disproportionately students with disabilities. So that was the argument for repealing it. On the flip side of that, though, the concern is that will school districts sort of throw in the towel? Will they try as hard to educate these children with intellectual disabilities
if they don't have to pass the test?
If they don't have to pass the test, right? And so it's too early to know the answer to that. But I think that's one of the things that we're looking at here, too. That's just one state's example, but that is part of the ripple effects here of, as you said, perhaps dismantling the entire Department of Education and perhaps also some of those No Child Left Behind laws that have been on the books now for 20 or so years.
Let's go to Jorge, who is in San Antonio, Texas. Hi, Jorge. Welcome to The Middle. Go ahead with your thoughts.
Cool. I came in halfway through the programming, and I'm dealing with them in the worst parts of their lives. And as far as, like, the Americans with Disabilities Act, really, I think part of our problem is, like, incredibly structural and foundational. And the fact that most of our buildings aren't even designed to accommodate disabled, let alone getting a stretcher to the door. So I feel like if we as a nation start building more empathetically and thinking about people's needs as they get older, because everybody will become disabled at some point, I think that'll actually help us to be more present in the moment, and then probably also start getting more policies in place and, hopefully kicking people who are discriminating against the disabled and others in the butt. Anyway, that was my thought. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for calling in. Let me get to another caller, and Kay, who's in Madison, Wisconsin. Hi, Kay. Welcome to The Middle. Go ahead. What do you think could be done to improve?
My agenda is this. I was born severely premature and ended up blind in my left eye. I've been researching this. It seems to be what I was always told, that it has to do with lack of oxygen in the incubator, but the hospitals don't seem to know this. And there are 5 people in the senior center here in Madison. We were all born premature, and 5 of us were blind totally or in one eye. And that's out of a population of the senior center, maybe 300 people. So you can do the math on that. Anyway, my main problem in terms of walking in Madison is It's a hilly area, and the street lights are white, which means if the sun is in back of the light, the glare just kills you. Also, to complicate my situation more, the doctors never, at least I never heard, and I do pay attention, that shingles is contagious. So I have a broken nose partly because of a disabled injury, and the shingles went in my right eye. So now I'm kind of 3/4 blind. So the senior center helps out by letting me use a computer, and they've adjusted a black screen. But the street walking is worse. And I've talked to people who say who are fully sighted, have problems crossing the streets. And I think the traffic speed should probably be reduced. It's probably 30 miles an hour. I used to work in traffic issues in New York City. I would reduce it to 25, and even a bicycle can probably kill you. And I'm not sure there's a law that it's required to wear helmets.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Alycia, when she talks about like the lights or reducing the traffic speed, I'm sure there are a lot of listeners who are like, wait, no, don't reduce the traffic speed. I want to be able to go 30 miles an hour. But these are the kinds of things that I think maybe the majority of Americans don't think about. But for an individual, that makes the difference between their ability to walk from one part of town to another or just participate in normal life.
I think for both the last two callers, we need to understand that the world was not built for disabled people. It was built for a very typical able-bodied perspective. And so there's all these challenges that we run into. And how we do better in that is prioritizing universal design approaches that are taking, multiple abilities, lived experiences into, into the development of new infrastructure, new cities, new schools, new workplaces, where we're reducing a lot of these barriers that are very isolated to this perfect able-bodied scenario. Because the fact is disability is a part of human nature. We all become disabled and in and out of it throughout our lives, and we haven't been historically building environments and infrastructure that accommodate diverse abilities. And so I think starting to look through a different lens of how we're developing is the way we start to solve these things, moving into a modern place of inclusion.
Tolliver, I know some comments are coming in online.
There's so many. I'm typing them up. Okay, so McDuffie from Georgia, and he stresses the state, not the country, says, isn't this best left up for states to decide? Aren't the individual states the best arbiters of what works for their residents? Why does it have to be a government-led solution nationwide, one ramp fits all solution?
Let's go to Callum on that.
Yeah.
What about that? Having the states make their own decisions about this as opposed to the federal government?
I mean, I think the challenge there is that you'll just get very inconsistent levels of accommodation, which we already have to some degree. I think that partly comes down to enforcement. But I mean, I'm thinking of, a conversation I had with a woman named Justina Plowden. She's the reigning Miss Wheelchair Louisiana, by the way. And she says her platform as Miss Louisiana was increasing, accommodations for wheelchair users in, sidewalks and public transit in her area. And she's, in her part of Louisiana, where she lives, it's still very spotty, and she has a hard time getting around. And so, I understand the states' rights argument. I also understand the argument from people like Justina who say, why should I in Louisiana have a poorer experience than somebody in New York City? I would submit this might be an area of bipartisan agreement, Jeremy. I mean, Alycia, you said the magic word a moment ago, infrastructure, right? I mean, remember the first Trump White House, every other week was infrastructure week. This might be an opportunity where you could actually get some bipartisan agreement to make some gains that are really not political one side or the other.
Let's go to Steve, who's in Edwardsville, Illinois. Hi, Steve. Welcome to The Middle. Go ahead.
Well, thank you for taking my call. I'm an attorney in downstate Illinois, and I go to courthouses all over the state, and many of the rural counties don't have accessible courtrooms. The courthouses, sometimes they're 2 stories, and the courtrooms are on the 2nd story, and there are long flights of steps. So I see an area of improvement for accommodations in courthouses.
That the rural areas, I mean, just sort of to the point that we were just talking about, Steve, that the rural areas are not the same when it comes to accessibility as maybe a major city.
Right. And a lot of these rural counties are cash-strapped. They don't have in a lot of cases, the financial wherewithal. So that's where you need a federal program to step in, where the counties, some of these counties are barely getting by, and so that's my area that I've seen in my daily life, where I see people who go to court and can't get into the courtroom.
Yeah,
I don't
Steve,
know what they do.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Alycia, I'm going to come to you and ask you just about the cost of upgrading places. It's not cheap. I remember a building I used to work in. They expanded into another building, and they had to create a ramp between the two, and it was either a ramp that had a really low grade, or they had to build a little elevator just to go 5 feet down from one side to the other. But it's not cheap to do that. Do you need federal money in order to make something like that happen, or can companies afford to do it?
I like to look at it from another perspective. Is it's not cheap, and it's a missed loss of return on investment to not have accessibility. You're leaving out a massive population to come in and be consumers, to spend money, to participate. And so if you have to spend X amount of dollars on, for your example, a ramp, how many more customers, consumers do you bring in the door? It's innovative to have accessibility implemented from a philosophical standpoint in an organization, company, infrastructure, because it allows more bodies to participate. And I think that's an old, tired way to look at accessibility. Money, delays, dollars. What about the human being it's going to allow in to start spending and engaging? And I think that's a shift in lens that we need to start to have.
Well, and Callum, you're at the Wall Street Journal. You've talked to companies about this kind of thing. Which mindset do they have on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, it is mixed. You're right. I mean, they do see the dollar signs, right, when it comes to some big ticket upgrades. But Alycia makes a great point about the business term is opportunity cost, right? What opportunity are you losing out on by not making your workplace accessible to all the talent that is out there? I think this is actually one of the potential, double-edged swords of, the Zoom world that we live in now, where some workplaces and other buildings perhaps as well. We heard from a caller about, I think it was Steve calling in about the courthouse access. But sometimes, the thought can be, well, we don't have to make the building so accessible. The accommodation can simply be, we'll do a virtual hearing, for example. And I'm not sure that's quite going far enough. I mean, that's a nice short-term solution, but the building itself ought to be accessible as well. And I just make one other point on this too, which is that there's lower hanging fruit, even before you get to those big upgrades, installing the elevators and the ramps. How about making sure that the stuff you already have is working? I mean, Alycia, what's the percentage of time when you try to go through a door to some building, you hit the wheelchair button for the door to open? What percentage of time does it actually work for you?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, there's definitely some user error and faulty buttons. So I don't know that statistic, but to your point,
I mean anecdotally. I don't mean a hard number. But the point. But how about just making sure that your buttons always work? I guess
totally.
I get it. You know what I mean? If you you already have it, you're already in compliance, whatnot. But how about just making sure that it's maintained and working properly? I think there's little stuff like that businesses can do before they think about what's the big expense of installing a new ramp or elevator.
By the way, Alycia, how do you feel about people who clearly have like a really high-end dog that they take on a plane, and it doesn't really seem like that's a service animal, but they're getting away with it anyway? I mean, does that hurt the ability for companies to? No, I don't do that. But does that hurt the ability for companies to, make things accessible when people, in my view, would abuse it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's abuse in everything. I also, try to look from the perspective of, even if it looks like they're abusing, we actually don't know what's going on with somebody unless we're having the conversation. So I think those assumptions are a little bit dangerous, and they can lead down the path of creating more bias and stigma towards something that might not actually be taking advantage of something. So I think it has to go further than just looking and going, oh, that dog, I don't know. I'm not sure that that's necessary. There's potentially something, and more than likely something that is going on there that, it's good to go.
Assume best intentions is what you're saying. So
I lead in with the heart of inclusion, typically, absolutely. And then you're always going to find something that is taking advantage. That's not a reason to not have these programs in place and advancing them, because there's so much value in it. So,
well, Tolliver, one of the trailblazers of disability rights in this country was activist Judith Heumann, who passed away in 2023.
Yeah, she delivered some powerful words in the 1988 Senate hearing on discrimination on the basis of disability.
When I was 5, my mother proudly pushed my wheelchair to our local public school, where I was promptly refused admission because the principal ruled that I was, quote, a fire hazard, end quote. I was forced to go on to home instruction, receiving 1 hour of education twice a week for 3.5 years. Was this the America of my parents' dreams? My entrance into mainstream society was blocked by discrimination and segregation.
Judith Heumann was known as the mother of the disability rights movement, and I encourage people, go online and look up some of these videos of her. It's pretty amazing to watch. We'll be right back with more of The Middle.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of to come around here and my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and this hour we're asking you what improvements are still needed in society for people with disabilities 35 years after the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law. You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. My guests are Wall Street Journal columnist Callum Borchers and Alycia Anderson, a disability and inclusion advocate and speaker. The phone lines are full, so let's get to Pat in Chicago. Hi, Pat. Go ahead.
Yeah, I represent a blind person. I'm a lawyer, and he was trying to get the right to circulate petitions for candidates and for issues, referendum issues, digitally. During COVID, that number of states allowed that for everybody, but they wouldn't allow it for people with disabilities or folks who couldn't get out on the street corner in whether it's a wheelchair or if they're blind. Under the law, they couldn't witness a signature the old-fashioned way or the conventional way. So digital signatures work for buying a house or your health records, everything else, but they don't seem to work for politics. And it really excludes lots and lots of people with disabilities from being able to participate fully in our government.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Pat, because I have a very good friend who is blind, and I've been with him at, buying a coffee, and he's got to basically trust the cashier if he uses a credit card to charge him the right amount. He can't see what's showing up on that screen. Does your client have other issues besides this about circulating petitions?
Well, he's head of an organization, Center for Independent Living, and he has a huge database that he communicates with all the time of people with disabilities. But when it comes to putting a candidate on the ballot by signing a petition, putting a referendum issue on the ballot, the law as it currently exists requires a wet signature that you must personally witness, which is impossible if you're blind. And the law can be changed. What they did in Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Maryland during COVID is they allowed everybody to have digital signatures, and it turned out to be more secure than the old-fashioned way of wet signatures. And here in Illinois, we ought to have the same opportunity for people with disabilities. And it's not just blind folks. It could be somebody who can't get out on a street corner and get signatures, but they communicate with their own digital database about an issue or candidate they believe in.
Pat, thank you very much for that. And Callum, I'm going to come to you and mention also that we are a country that doesn't make our dollar bills different sizes so that people who can't see what's on them, like other countries, like the euro, you get a €5 bill and a 20 and they're different sizes. We don't do that in this country. What about that?
It's a good question. I didn't really know much about this, Jeremy, until I started looking into it this week. And the U.S. Bureau of Engraving has taken a different approach to this. They're apparently developing, I guess what you could call like a Braille currency, like, raised, tactile bills. But we're not expecting the first one to come out until 2026. The first $10 note is on schedule for next year, apparently. In the meanwhile, though, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing has distributed more than 100,000 currency readers. They say this is like a standalone device that people who are visually impaired can use to read bills in the absence of something tactile. And they've also, just as of March of this year, they've also got this mobile app with almost 200,000 downloads that basically turns your smartphone into a currency reader as well. So they're going with a more digital high-tech solution, I guess you could say, than the enlarged note itself.
Another caller from Chicago that's not the Pope, but Allegra is with us from Chicago. Allegra, go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your piece. I'm really glad that we're talking about this. I'm a special education teacher. I have been for over 20 years. And one of the things I was thinking might be helpful for people to know is that something that we can do just as citizens and neighbors, if we're able, is to shovel the entire sidewalk during the winter. Sometimes people just shovel like what their shovel holds, which is about half the sidewalk. But if you're a wheelchair user, that doesn't help you get down the street. And it helps you stay in bounds. So it doesn't really have to do with policy or anything, but it's just something that I always wish we would do. And also to look out for the curb cuts. Like if you're shoveling and you live by the road or you just like getting exercise in the winter, like to check out your curb cuts and think about, could a person using a wheelchair get down the street in the winter if they needed to?
Yeah. Allegra, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. Alycia, I mean, you live on the West Coast, so you probably don't have to deal with snow.
I don't.
But I'm sure this has come up in your conversations as an advocate.
Yeah, I mean, I think to her point is let's be aware of our environment and what the collective is kind of going through and navigating, and how do we make the world work again more universally, that we're thinking about creating paths that work, right? Whether it's shoveling snow or, creating universal access somewhere. I lived in Europe and did a master's program over there, and that's where I really learned how to come together collaboratively and find paths to access when accessibility was very, very limited. And it takes someone like this woman, I'm so sorry, I don't remember your name, I apologize, but
Allegra.
Yeah, Allegra, seeing something, and then also like on the disabled person's perspective, like how do we come together and find a path forward that works? And so like that was a perfect example of just being aware of environments that might be limiting, and how can we like as a community solve for problems.
Jonah is calling from Kimberly, Wisconsin. Hi, Jonah. What do you think could be done to make things better for people with disabilities?
Hi there. Thanks for having me on. I think that in general, human beings are looked at, their value is determined by how much money they can produce, how many hours they can work. I think that's a really awful way to look at all of humanity, and it's one of the big reasons why disabled people are looked down upon, because they have a harder time working in most jobs. But we shouldn't judge people solely for the capital that they produce. We are human beings, So I think that the billionaire mindset, all that junk, I think it's one of the main reasons that we don't treat disabled people very well.
Interesting. Callum, what do you think about that?
I think Jonah makes a great point. I think the second piece of it too, though, is that we also sometimes underestimate, what that ability is, right? So there's the layer I think that Jonah's talking about is let's not diminish the human value of people who may not, air quotes, contribute to society, right, in the way that we conventionally think of it. But also, let's look for potential in folks that you may have overlooked in the past, right? I think that's been one of the pleasant developments, post-pandemic. Again, partly because of the work from home accommodation. I think companies sort of woke up to the reality. We saw the employment rate rise for people with disabilities once you took away that
by
barrier
a lot, I
for
think,
a lot of
right?
them, by a lot, of having to get physically to the office. And it can be small stuff, Jeremy. I mean, I'm thinking, I used to commute to an office every day, for example. Yeah, I tell you something like in the winter, just on my body having cerebral palsy, sort of being kind of stiff, and I just won't move as well in the winter. Like that kind of thing can take a little bit of a toll. And so if you have more absences, let's say, or you're not your full energetic self at the office because you expended a lot of energy just getting there in the first place. I think those are things that we don't always see or think about. And so when you can make those accommodations like that to make sure that you get the full potential out of somebody who has a disability, I think that's sort of the next level of what Jonah's talking about as well.
Let's get to Eva. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and also keeping in mind that making the environment more dynamic and it's not necessarily the disabled person not being able to fully participate. It could be the environment in which is limiting that's the problem. It's not the disability. It's us needing to be more adaptable and accommodating. I had somebody on my podcast that is neurodiverse, and he's building AI, and he's doing all these amazing things, and he works really, 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 really hard. And all he needs is like a quiet room for 30 minutes to go rest his brain. And then he's back at work hustling. And if we're not creating those flexible environments for people with disabilities to check out for a minute or, have whatever accommodation that they need, then there comes the problem. So it's the accommodations that need to be more flexible within work environments.
Yeah. Eva's in San Antonio, Texas. Hi, Eva. Go ahead with your thoughts.
Hi, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. So I have a 16-year-old daughter who has depression, and I noticed that a lot of people, just friends and family even, who think disability automatically think physical disability. They don't, I guess they don't think of a mental disability. It's more like a secondary disability, if that makes sense. And so we come across a lot of, like with school, for example, and a lot of issues with that. And there are days where she can't get out of bed. She has depression that bad. She's had self-harm, et cetera, et cetera. But any which way, the point is what I would like to see is a better education for mainstream, quote unquote, mainstream people, for the public to understand that if you're disabled, it's not automatically a physical disability. There's mental health disabilities, and people need to be educated and be more aware of that. And I'm afraid that when she goes out into the workforce, I mean, she's 16 now, and she's going to go find a job, and then there are days where she can't function because of that depression, and then lose the job. And I wish there would be a better education for people to understand.
Yeah, especially, Alycia, what do you think of people who, there are so many, I mean, we mentioned more than 70 million Americans identify as having some kind of disability, and many of those would not be visible disabilities.
Yeah, I mean, most of them are not. And the girl in the wheelchair has been the symbol, but it's actually a very, very small percentage of people who have disabilities like mine that you can see very clearly. And it's education, awareness, and continued action on what we learn to create the knowledge of understanding that disability is non-apparent. And, from chronic illness to neurodiversity to mental health, like all these things that have, and creating work environments that feel safe and secure for somebody to raise their hand and say, I feel this way, this is what I need. That's what we need to start to create. And continue to build on, not pull back from. So education, awareness, key in all of this.
Callum?
I would just add that there's, this mindset shift that Eva's talking about is a work in progress within the community of people who have disabilities as well. And I think that's important to know as well. I'm thinking of a decade ago, Jeremy, in my younger, fitter days when I was rowing, I used to train with some really high level, like Paralympic rower types. And we're talking about sometimes people who, they got legs blown off in a rock or something, or they have, spina bifida. And for folks like that, I will tell you, there is a little bit of eyebrow raising when they hear about somebody who says, well, I can't go do such and such because I have anxiety or I have depression. Not everyone, but I think that's a real thing. For people who have a very big physical impairment, sometimes those folks also, it's not just able-bodied folks, sometimes those folks too have a hard time recognizing the complexity of mental and emotional disabilities as well. So I just think that's important to note as well. This is a work in progress for all of us.
Yeah. Nathan is calling from Tampa, Florida. Hi, Nathan. What do you think could be done to improve things for people with disabilities in this country?
I grew up in the I grew up with dyslexia, and I was put in SLD at around first grade.
SLD is what?
Specific learning disabilities. They've probably changed the label since then. I mean, honestly, it was and probably still is an experimental program. As they learn more about the disability, I'm sure it's changed names, et cetera, et cetera. But I always wondered, like what kind of effect this has on the population. And I've always wondered, like, outside populations like Japan or other nations and how that's affected them. But one time I was listening to Bill Maher, there was a guy talking about dyslexia. Apparently there's a large number of people in the prison population that are dyslexic. I think it's over half. I'd have to look at it right. I'd have to look it up now.
Yeah.
But it's an alarming number. And I've always been the, of the school that you should prevent instead of trying to clean up something. You should prevent it.
Yeah, I think we've got it there. Alycia, I think one of the things that he brings up there is that, maybe people can't make it in society because of their disability and end up in a prison situation or end up in a situation that is that a problem that you're seeing?
I think that's I mean, I'm sure that's a percentage of a certain amount of people.
Right.
But there's so many other narratives around disability that we're needing to project into the society about the possibility of the lived experience. Honestly, there's going to be a percentage in every population for what you just described, but I think it's starting to have the conversations as well of the power of the lived experience and what we bring into the community and into the world.
Callum, just a few seconds left here. Let me give you the last word. What do you see as the biggest obstacle to better inclusion in society for people with disabilities? Is it about, as we've been hearing all these callers, is it about stigma? Is it about infrastructure? Is it about lack of understanding?
It's some of all those things. I guess the biggest thing I would say is maybe an inability to see the big picture. Think about that lost call. Maybe ending up in prison is the extreme example, but maybe the more likely scenario is if we don't include and accommodate disabilities early on, maybe somebody doesn't end up in prison, but do they end up on Medicaid later on? Do they end up on SNAP benefits later on? If you don't like paying for the special education services now, you're really not going to like paying for the Medicaid and the SNAP and other accommodations down the line. Isn't it better to invest in folks early on and bring everyone into the fold of our society so they can be the fullest versions of themselves and contribute the very best they can at whatever ability level they have? And I think that ability to see the big picture will make all of us maybe a little bit more generous with one another and a little bit more empathetic as well.
That is Callum Borchers, a columnist for the Wall Street Journal. We've also been speaking with Alycia Anderson, a disability and inclusion advocate and speaker. Thanks so much to both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
And don't forget, The Middle is available as a podcast in partnership with iHeart Podcasts on the iHeart app or wherever you listen to podcasts. And coming to your feed in the next few days, an episode of our weekly podcast extra, One Thing Trump Did. We'll talk about Signalgate and more of what's happening in Pete Hegseth's Pentagon. And next week, we'll be right back here asking you how the tariffs are affecting you.
As always, you can call in at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com, where you can also sign up for our free weekly newsletter and find Middle merch, where every dollar goes right back into the show.
I am Jeremy Hobson, and I'll talk to you next week.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I actually drop better when I'm high. It heightens my senses, calms me down. If anything, I'm more careful. Honestly, it just helps me focus.
That's probably what the driver who killed a 4-year-old told himself.
And now he's in prison. You see, no matter what you tell yourself, if you feel different, you drive different. So if you're high, just don't drive. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.